Some people mistake silence for weakness right up until silence speaks. At 8:17 on a gray Monday morning, the lobby of the Richmond Public Safety Building moved with the cold rhythm of routine. Shoes tapped across polished tile. Elevators opened and closed with mechanical sighs. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Badges flashed. Nobody looked at anyone longer than a second. In places built on authority, people learned early to keep their heads down. Then she walked in. Naomi Carter entered through the front doors wearing a charcoal coat, low heels, and the kind of calm that made noise feel unnecessary. She carried no designer purse, no visible status symbol, no attempt to impress anyone in the room. Just a slim leather folder tucked beneath one arm and eyes that noticed everything. The security scanner beeped for the man ahead of her. He laughed nervously, emptied his pockets, and moved on. Naomi waited her turn without complaint. She stood straight, hands relaxed, gaze steady. To most people, she looked ordinary. But there was something about the stillness in her posture that didn't belong to ordinary people. Officer Brad Collins noticed her the moment she stepped inside. 6'2", broad shoulders, polished boots, and the kind of grin that only appears when someone thinks the room belongs to him. Brad leaned against the marble desk beside the metal detector, talking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. He liked an audience. He liked reactions even more. He glanced Naomi up and down, then smirked. Cleaning crew uses the back entrance. A few heads turned. Someone near the coffee cart let out a short laugh, then quickly pretended to cough. Naomi stopped 3 feet from the scanner. She looked at Brad, not with anger, not with fear, but with the same expression someone might give bad weather. Temporary. Brad straightened, encouraged by the silence. Didn't hear me? He asked. Employees know the rules. Visitors too. Which one are you? More eyes drifted toward them now. Office workers slowed their pace. A clerk holding a stack of folders paused near the wall. In every public humiliation, there is always a crowd deciding whether to watch or look away. Naomi said nothing. She simply checked the large silver clock above the elevators. 8:18. Then she returned her eyes to him. That bothered Brad more than if she had argued. He stepped around the desk and pointed toward a side hallway. Back doors around the corner. Unless you're lost. Another small laugh floated through the lobby. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the leather folder, then relaxed again. She moved one step closer to the scanner. Brad lifted a hand to block her path. ID, he said. Let's make this quick. She reached into her coat pocket. The room subtly leaned in. She removed a card holder and placed it in his hand face down. Brad looked at it, then at her. You people always do this dramatic pause thing, he said. Turn it over, Naomi replied. Her voice was low, level, and impossible to rush. Brad chuckled, playing to the room. Or what? The elevator at the far end of the lobby opened with a soft chime. 3 senior officials stepped out mid-conversation, then abruptly stopped when they saw Naomi. The air changed first. Then the faces did. Brad didn't notice yet. He was still smiling as he flipped the card over. The color drained from him so quickly it looked like someone had dimmed the lights. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because printed beneath the city seal, in clean black letters no one in that lobby would forget, were 6 words. Deputy Commissioner Naomi Carter. For one full second, no one moved. The lobby that had been humming with footsteps, scanners, elevator bells, and low conversation now felt sealed in glass. Officer Brad Collins stared at the identification card in his hand, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something safer. They did not. Deputy Commissioner Naomi Carter. His eyes lifted slowly to meet hers, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything that could return the room to the version of reality he preferred. Naomi gave him nothing except calm. Behind him, the 3 senior officials who had stepped off the elevator were already crossing the marble floor with sudden urgency. Deputy Chief Alan Mercer, a man known for speaking little and noticing everything, reached them first. Commissioner Carter, he said, extending his hand with visible respect. We were expecting you upstairs. The words landed harder than a shout. Brad's fingers loosened instantly, nearly dropping the card. The clerk near the wall lowered her folders. The man by the coffee cart stared into his cup like it had become deeply interesting. The people who had laughed seconds earlier discovered appointments they suddenly needed to keep. Naomi accepted Mercer's handshake, then took back her identification without looking at Brad. "Good morning, Deputy Chief," she said. Her voice remained steady, almost gentle. That made the silence around her feel even sharper. Brad tried to recover. "Ma'am, I did not realize." "That is accurate," Naomi replied. No raised tone. No anger. Just truth placed carefully between them. Mercer glanced at Brad, then at the security camera mounted above the entrance. He did not need to ask what had happened. Buildings like this always recorded more than people remembered. "Officer Collins," Mercer said, "step aside." Brad obeyed so quickly it seemed he had forgotten how confident he had looked 30 seconds earlier. Naomi turned toward the elevators, but stopped after 2 steps. She checked the silver wall clock again. 8:20, right on time. Then she faced Mercer. "How many employees are in this building before 9 each morning?" Mercer blinked. "Roughly 300, depending on shift rotation." "And how many entered through this lobby while your officer was performing for them?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "Too many." Naomi nodded once. Then they all received the same message. Nobody breathed loudly enough to be heard. Brad swallowed hard. "Commissioner, I was trying to maintain security protocol." Naomi looked at him for the first time since the reveal. Security protocol does not require humiliation. It does not require assumptions. And it certainly does not require an audience. Each sentence was quiet enough that people leaned closer to hear it. That was the strange thing about real authority. It never needed volume. Mercer motioned discreetly to another officer to take over the checkpoint. The younger man rushed in, face pale, hands trembling as he straightened trays and reset the scanner. Naomi watched him for a moment and softened slightly. "Thank you," she said. The young officer nearly stood taller from 2 simple words. Then she stepped into the elevator with Mercer and the others. The doors began to close, but before they sealed, Naomi spoke one final sentence into the frozen lobby. "Respect is tested most when no title is visible." The door slid shut. Only then did the room exhale. Brad remained near the desk, shoulders stiff, staring at his reflection in the brushed steel elevator doors. He had spent years believing a badge introduced him before he spoke. This morning, everyone had watched what his words introduced instead. And upstairs, on the 12th floor, the first meeting of the day was just beginning. The 12th floor conference room was built to impress people who needed reminding. Glass walls, dark walnut table, 12 leather chairs arranged with mathematical precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking over Richmond, where the city below seemed smaller, cleaner, easier to control from a distance. By 8:27, every seat was filled except one. Department heads sat with tablets open, folders stacked, coffee cooling untouched. They spoke in careful voices and unfinished sentences, each one waiting for the woman who had already changed the mood of the building before reaching the room. Then the doors opened. Naomi Carter entered without hurry, carrying the same slim leather folder. No entourage, no dramatic entrance. Yet every person at the table straightened instinctively. Deputy Chief Mercer rose first. Others followed a beat later. Naomi nodded once and took the seat at the head of the table. "Please," she said, "sit." Her tone was courteous, but nobody mistook it for a suggestion. Chairs moved softly. Screens dimmed. Pens were lifted. Naomi placed the folder in front of her and looked around the room, taking in each face with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that people reveal themselves fastest when they believe they are only being observed. Commissioner Elaine Porter, nearing retirement and famous for reading political winds better than reports, folded her hands. "We are glad to have you here this morning," she said. Naomi met her eyes. "I am glad to be here on time." The sentence was simple. The meaning was not. A few glances dropped toward the table. Naomi opened the folder. Inside were schedules, staffing charts, public complaint summaries, turnover numbers, and something thicker beneath them all. "Before we discuss budgets, recruitment, or public messaging," she said, "we are going to discuss culture." The words settled heavily across the room. Some executives shifted in their seats. Others suddenly found their notes fascinating. Naomi continued, "Culture is what happens when no cameras are expected, no reporters are present, and no one important appears to be watching." Mercer remained still. He knew exactly where this was going. "This morning," Naomi said, "I entered through the front lobby without announcing myself. In under 2 minutes, I was redirected, mocked, delayed, and publicly diminished by an officer whose confidence depended entirely on guessing wrong about me. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Naomi slid a still image across the table. A printed frame from the lobby camera. Brad Collins, smiling. Naomi standing calm. A crowd pretending not to watch. This is not about one man, she said. If it were, the problem would be easy. She slid a second page forward. Then a third. Complaint summaries. Anonymous employee surveys. Visitor feedback. Patterns, not incidents. Habits, not accidents. The room laughed because the room recognized the script, Naomi said quietly. Some laughed out loud. Others laughed internally. Many said nothing. Silence is often the loudest participant. Commissioner Porter cleared her throat. Deputy Commissioner, perhaps we should review this privately before broad conclusions are drawn. Naomi turned to her with a polite expression that somehow felt sharper than anger. Respectfully, Commissioner, privacy has protected the wrong people for years. The city skyline reflected faintly in the glass behind her, making her appear doubled for a moment, as if truth itself had taken 2 seats at the table. She closed the folder. Starting today, every supervisor in this department will undergo direct culture review. Promotion recommendations are frozen pending audit. Front desk assignments are being rotated. Complaint files marked unresolved will be reopened. Several faces changed color. One captain actually dropped his pen. Naomi noticed and continued as though nothing had happened. And at 10:05, Officer Brad Collins will join me in this room. Heads lifted all at once. Why? One assistant chief asked before he could stop himself. Naomi's gaze did not move. Because accountability should never happen in whispers. Outside the windows, Richmond carried on unaware. Inside, the old balance of power had already begun to tilt. By 9:41, the building no longer sounded the same. Routine had been replaced by rumor, and rumor always moved faster than elevators. Phones rang softer. Conversations stopped when doors opened. Officers who normally laughed across hallways now spoke in low voices beside vending machines and copy rooms. The story had already traveled through every floor, changing shape each time it was told. Some said the new deputy commissioner had walked in undercover. Some said she had planned the whole thing. Some said Brad Collins had resigned on the spot. None of that was true. The truth was simpler and therefore more dangerous. She had shown up, and people had shown themselves. In the ground floor security office, Brad sat alone at a metal desk that suddenly felt too small for him. His duty belt rested beside a half-finished coffee gone cold. The monitor wall in front of him displayed camera feeds from entrances, stairwells, parking decks, and corridors. On screen 12, he could see the same lobby where his voice had carried so confidently less than 2 hours earlier. Now every reflection in the marble floor looked like judgment. He replayed the footage 3 times, hoping context would rescue him. It did not. The grin looked worse than he remembered. The pointing hand looked childish. The laughter in the background sounded thin and nervous. His own posture, once powerful in his mind, now looked like costume confidence under fluorescent lights. A knock came at the open door. Sergeant Luis Ramirez stepped inside, carrying a clipboard he did not need. Ramirez had worked the building long enough to survive 3 administrations and countless egos. "You good?" he asked. Brad forced a shrug. "Misunderstanding." Ramirez glanced at the monitors. "That is one word for it." Brad leaned back. "Come on, Luis. You know how this place works. People joke. People move on." Ramirez said nothing for a moment. Then he pulled a chair and sat across from him. "No," he said quietly. "Some people joke. Other people carry it home." Brad looked away first. Ramirez continued. "You think this morning became a problem when you saw her title. It became a problem when you decided who she was before she spoke." Brad's jaw tightened. "You taking her side?" "I am taking the side of common sense." The radio on the desk crackled. Dispatch chatter. Routine calls from a city that did not know one building was learning a lesson in real time. Brad rubbed his forehead. "They are making an example out of me." Ramirez stood. "Maybe. Or maybe you volunteered." He left before Brad could answer. At 9:58, an email alert chimed across the department network. Mandatory attendance. Supervisory staff and command observers. 12th floor conference room. 10:05 sharp. Subject line, professional conduct review. Brad read it twice. Then a third time. His name was listed alone beneath required presence. Down the hall, officers pretended not to stare as he walked toward the elevator. Some offered sympathy with their eyes. Others offered satisfaction. Most offered distance. That was how institutions protected themselves when weather changed. In the elevator mirror, Brad adjusted his collar and practiced expressions. Confident, regretful, misunderstood, cooperative. None of them looked convincing. The doors opened on 12. The receptionist near the conference suite did not smile. "They are waiting for you," she said. Through the glass wall, he could see silhouettes seated around the long walnut table. Command staff, department heads, Mercer, Commissioner Porter, and at the far end, perfectly still, Naomi Carter with the leather folder placed squarely in front of her. Brad felt something unfamiliar then, something no badge could soften. It was not fear of punishment. It was fear of being seen clearly. The receptionist opened the door. "Officer Collins," she said, "please step inside." The conference room door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than anything said all morning. Brad Collins stepped inside and felt every eye register him before looking away. The long walnut table was full. Captains, assistant chiefs, legal advisors, human resources, operations command. People who usually decided other people's futures now sat unusually still, as if unsure where to place their hands. At the far end, Naomi Carter remained seated with her folder closed, posture straight, expression unreadable. She did not gesture for Brad to sit. That decision was left hanging in the air like a test. "Officer Collins," Deputy Chief Mercer said, "take the chair at center." A single seat had been placed halfway down the table, separated from both ends by deliberate space. Brad sat, trying not to show how much the arrangement unsettled him. Naomi waited until the room settled again. Then she spoke. "At 8:17 this morning, I entered the front lobby of this building." Her tone was calm enough to force everyone else into silence. "At 8:18, Officer Collins publicly redirected me based on assumptions unrelated to policy, conduct, or security risk. At 8:19, he requested identification only after mockery failed to move me. At 8:20, he learned who I was." She looked at Brad. "Do you dispute any part of that timeline?" Brad cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I was attempting to manage access control in a busy lobby." Naomi nodded slightly, as if acknowledging effort in a child's answer. "That was not my question." The room remained motionless. Brad shifted in his seat. "No, ma'am." Naomi opened the folder and slid one page toward him. It was a printed transcript from the lobby audio feed. His words, clean and undeniable in black ink. "Cleaning crew uses the back entrance. Unless you are lost. You people always do this dramatic pause thing." Brad stared at the page as though language itself had betrayed him. Naomi continued. "When people hear their own words later, they often meet themselves for the first time." No one at the table moved. Commissioner Porter folded her hands tighter. Mercer looked straight ahead. Naomi slid a second packet forward. Complaint summaries tied to front desk interactions over the last 18 months. Dismissive tone. Unequal screening. Unprofessional remarks. Selective enforcement. Different names, same patterns. "You are not seated here because of one morning," Naomi said. "You are seated here because one morning exposed many mornings." Brad looked up quickly. Those complaints were never substantiated. Naomi's gaze did not change. Many things go unsubstantiated when the wrong people review them. A legal advisor coughed into his fist. Nobody else breathed loudly enough to hear. Brad tried again. "I joke around with everyone. That is how I keep the lobby light." Naomi leaned forward for the first time. The movement was small, but the room tightened instantly. Humiliation is not lightness to the person carrying it. Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. Naomi let the silence do its work. "Tell me," she said at last, "if my title had not been printed on that card, would your tone have changed?" He hesitated too long. That was answer enough. Naomi closed the folder. "Exactly." She turned to the room. "This department has confused familiarity with professionalism, confidence with competence, and silence with consent." Several executives lowered their eyes. "That confusion ends today." She faced Brad once more. "Effective immediately, you are removed from public contact duty pending full review, retraining, and complaint re-examination." Brad's shoulders dropped before he could stop them. Naomi was not finished. "You will also return to the lobby tomorrow at 8 a.m. He blinked. "For what?" Her voice remained level. "To stand beside the officer replacing you and watch how respect looks when practiced on purpose." The room stayed silent, but this time the silence belonged to her. When the meeting ended at 10:42, nobody rushed for the door. Chairs remained half-turned. Pens stayed motionless above notebooks. It was the strange pause that follows a storm when people are not yet sure what still stands. Naomi Carter gathered her folder, thanked no one, and walked out with the same measured pace she had carried all morning. She did not look back because she did not need to. The room she left behind was already changed. Brad Collins remained seated several seconds after everyone else rose. His removal from public contact duty had been delivered without raised voices, without insults, without spectacle. Somehow that made it heavier. Public humiliation can be argued with. Quiet accountability leaves less room to hide. Deputy Chief Mercer stopped beside him. "You should go home for the day," he said. Brad looked up, suspended. No, Mercer straightened a stack of unused papers. "Reflective leave. Use it wisely." Brad almost laughed at the phrase, but nothing in him could find the energy. He rode the elevator down alone. On the mirrored walls, he saw a man who looked older than he had at sunrise. The lobby was busy again by the time he crossed it. A younger officer now worked the checkpoint with careful professionalism, greeting visitors, explaining procedures, thanking them for patience. People moved through smoothly. No jokes, no smirks, no performance. Brad slowed near the doors, watching for a moment longer than necessary. Respect looked almost boring when done correctly. Outside, Richmond had warmed into a bright late morning. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A bus sighed at the curb. Construction workers in orange vests laughed over coffee from a cart. Life continued with no awareness that a man's certainty had cracked open on the corner of Broad Street. Brad drove home through neighborhoods he had patrolled for years without really seeing. Brick row houses, barber shops, churches, school crossing signs, mothers walking strollers, men unloading groceries. Faces he used to sort too quickly into stories he had never earned the right to tell. At a red light, he remembered Ramirez saying, "Some people joke, other people carry it home." The sentence followed him all the way to his driveway. His apartment was neat in the way lonely places often are. Television remote-centered. Shoes lined evenly by the wall. Refrigerator humming louder than usual. He loosened his tie and sat at the kitchen table without, turning on a single light. Silence in an empty room sounds different when there is no one left to blame. He opened his phone. Department group chats were active, then quiet when he appeared online. News had not reached the public, but inside the building it had spread everywhere. He set the phone face down. On impulse, he called his older sister, Denise. She taught 8th grade history and had never once been impressed by his badge. "You sound terrible," she said after hello. Brad stared at the grain in the table. "Bad day at work." "Deserved?" she asked. He almost answered automatically, then stopped. "Maybe." Denise was quiet for a moment. "That is the first honest thing you have said to me in years." He exhaled slowly. "I think I have been the problem longer than today." "Most people are," she said. "Today was just the day you noticed." After the call, Brad sat for a long time with no television, no music, no distraction. He replayed the morning again, but now he saw details he had missed before. The clerk lowering her eyes. The nervous laughter. Naomi checking the clock instead of defending herself. She had known something he did not. Time exposes people faster than arguments. At 7:12 that evening, an email arrived from Naomi Carter's office. Mandatory appearance. Lobby assignment observation. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. professional attire required. Attached beneath it was a single sentence. Learn what authority sounds like when it does not need to shout. Brad read it twice. Then, for the first time in a very long while, he felt ashamed enough to listen. At 7:53 the next morning, the Richmond Public Safety Building looked exactly the way it had the day before. Same gray stone exterior. Same revolving doors. Same city buses sighing at the curb. Same stream of employees carrying coffee and private worries. Buildings often appear unchanged long after the people inside them are not. Brad Collins arrived 12 minutes early in pressed slacks, polished shoes, and a plain navy button-down with no badge on his belt and no authority clipped to his chest. He had dressed carefully, then realized halfway through the drive that clothes could not repair character. Inside the lobby, the checkpoint was already active. Officer Maya Henderson stood at the scanner station greeting each person with the same calm tone. "Good morning. Thank you for waiting. Laptop in the tray, please." "You are all set." No sarcasm. No impatience. No selective warmth depending on who approached. Just steady professionalism, repeated person after person like a discipline. Brad took the side position Mercer had assigned him, 10 feet back from the desk, where he could observe without participating. It felt strange to stand in the space where he had once performed so confidently and now be instructed to remain silent. Naomi Carter entered at 8 o'clock sharp through the same front doors as promised. She wore a dark green coat this time and carried no folder. She nodded once to Henderson, who returned it without fuss. Then Naomi stepped beside Brad, not close enough for comfort, not far enough for escape. "Watch the room," she said. That was all. A construction worker in dusty boots approached first, lunch cooler in hand. Henderson smiled politely, explained the metal detector, and thanked him for his patience when it beeped for a pocketful of screws. He left grinning. A woman with 2 toddlers and a diaper bag came next, flustered and apologizing before anyone had asked anything of her. Henderson knelt to child height, handed the older boy a plastic tray for helping, and had the family through security in under 2 minutes. Then came a suited attorney speaking loudly into a phone, irritated before reaching the line. Henderson waited until he paused for breath, then said, "Sir, I can help you faster when I have your attention." He handed over his phone and shoes without another word. Brad noticed something uncomfortable. She adjusted her tone to behavior, not appearance. Naomi glanced at him. "What do you see?" He answered honestly because there was no energy left for performance. "She treats everyone the same." Naomi shook her head slightly. "No, she treats everyone fairly. Same and fair are not always twins." The sentence stayed with him. At 8:19, an elderly black woman entered using a silver cane and moving carefully across the tile. Yesterday, Brad might have rushed her, sighed loudly, or redirected her to a side lane. Henderson stepped from behind the desk, brought a chair, and said, "Take your time, ma'am. We will move at your pace." The woman smiled with visible relief. Brad felt heat rise in his face for reasons unrelated to the room temperature. Naomi watched him without expression. "Recognition can be uncomfortable," she said quietly. "It is still progress." A few minutes later, Sergeant Ramirez passed through the lobby, coffee in hand. He glanced at Brad and raised one eyebrow. No words were needed. By 8:40, the line had moved faster than usual, complaints were zero, and the atmosphere felt lighter without anyone trying to be entertaining. Brad looked around the lobby he thought he had controlled for years and realized he had mistaken tension for order. Naomi checked the silver wall clock, then faced him. "Yesterday you managed a checkpoint," she said. "Today you witnessed leadership." Brad swallowed. "What happens now?" Naomi held his gaze for a long moment. "Now," she said, "we find out whether embarrassment changed you or only slowed you down." At 8:41, Naomi Carter left the lobby without ceremony, stepping into the elevator as if she had simply completed an ordinary task. Yet the space she walked out of felt different again. The line moved smoothly. Voices were lower. Even the fluorescent lights seemed less harsh when nobody was using them as a stage. Brad Collins remained where she had placed him, 10 feet from the desk, hands loosely folded, watching Officer Maya Henderson continue the work he once believed required swagger. It required patience instead. At 9:05, Deputy Chief Mercer approached carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed one to Brad without comment. They stood side by side for a moment, facing the lobby traffic like men observing weather. "How long have you known?" Brad asked finally. Mercer sipped once. "Known what?" "That I was bad at this." Mercer almost smiled. "You were never bad at screening bags. You were bad at meeting people." The words landed cleanly because they were true. Brad stared ahead. Why did nobody say anything? Mercer glanced toward Henderson helping a man with a stroller collapse it for the scanner. Some did. You only heard voices that sounded like yours. A young officer passing through nodded respectfully to Mercer, then to Brad with uncertain politeness. Brad noticed something new in the gesture. Pity and possibility often look alike from a distance. At 9:22, the elderly woman with the silver cane returned from records upstairs. Henderson stepped around the desk again and held the side gate open for her. As the woman passed, she looked at Brad, paused, and said, "Young man, kindness fits everyone." Then she continued toward the doors. Brad stood motionless long after she was gone. Some lessons arrive in conference rooms. Others arrive with canes and soft voices. Near 10 o'clock, Naomi sent word for Brad to report to the training office on the third floor. The room was smaller than he expected. No dramatic tribunal. No rows of chairs. Just a square table, a monitor, a legal pad, and Naomi seated near the window reviewing notes. She motioned to the chair across from her. Sit. Brad obeyed. She clicked a remote. The monitor displayed clips from the previous morning's lobby footage. No sound at first. Just posture. His leaning grin. Her stillness. The crowd drifting closer. Naomi paused the screen on his pointing hand. What do you notice? Brad swallowed. I look arrogant. You look comfortable, she corrected. Comfort can be dangerous when built on other people's discomfort. She resumed the footage, this time with audio. Hearing his own voice in that room, stripped of momentum and ego, was worse than hearing discipline. It sounded cheap. Naomi stopped again. I am not interested in whether you feel embarrassed, she said. Embarrassment is about image. I am interested in whether you feel responsible. Brad stared at the table grain. For the first time in years, he did not search for language that might save him. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Naomi studied him long enough to test whether honesty would hold under pressure. Good, she said. Because responsibility can build something embarrassment never will. She slid a packet across the table. Community outreach rotation. Visitor services retraining. Bias. Recognition workshops. Mentorship under Henderson for 30 days. Brad blinked. You are not firing me. Naomi leaned back. If I believed people could not change, I would not waste my mornings on them. He looked at the packet again, then up at her. Why give me a chance? Naomi's answer came without hesitation. Because power that only punishes teaches fear. Power that also rebuilds teaches standards. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. At the door she paused. Do not mistake a second chance for trust, she said. Trust arrives later, walking. Brad nodded once. As he stepped into the hallway, packet in hand, he realized consequence had not ended his career. It had handed him work he should have started years ago. 30 days later, the lobby of the Richmond Public Safety Building no longer carried the same invisible weight. People still hurried through revolving doors with coffee in hand. Elevators still chimed. Shoes still crossed polished tile in restless patterns. But the atmosphere had changed in ways no memo could fully explain. Visitors were greeted before being judged. Questions were answered without attitude. Delays were handled with patience instead of performance. The room had not become perfect. It had become conscious. Brad Collins stood behind the checkpoint beside Officer Maya Henderson, scanning bags, offering directions, repeating procedures with practiced calm. He no longer tried to sound important. He had discovered how exhausting that had always been. Henderson had trained him hard and without cruelty. She corrected tone before policy, posture before process, assumptions before errors. People here respect faster than instructions, she told him on day 3. Remember that. He did. At 8:16 on a bright Thursday morning, a line formed quickly after a city council hearing upstairs let out early. Suits, contractors, parents, delivery drivers, attorneys, retirees. The usual mix of urgency and impatience. A man in an expensive overcoat cut to the front and slapped a folder on the counter. I do not have time for this line, he announced to no one and everyone. The old Brad might have admired the swagger. The new one recognized. Insecurity dressed in wool. Sir, Brad said evenly. Everyone here has somewhere to be. The line starts behind the blue marker. The man frowned. Do you know who I am? A few heads turned, waiting for conflict the way people sometimes do. Brad almost smiled. No, sir, he said. And it does not matter for screening order. Henderson kept working without looking up. The man hesitated, surprised to find no audience joining him. Then, under the pressure of ordinary fairness, he stepped to the back of the line. Several people exchanged small glances of relief. One woman mouthed thank you. Brad nodded once and continued. Growth rarely feels cinematic while it is happening. It usually looks like repeating the right choice after years of practicing the wrong one. At 8:20, the front doors opened and Naomi Carter entered. No announcement. No entourage. Same measured pace. Same ability to quiet a room simply by noticing it. Brad saw her immediately and straightened, not from fear now, but respect freely chosen. She approached the desk while Henderson processed the next visitor. Brad waited until the lane cleared. Good morning, Deputy Commissioner, he said. Welcome back. Naomi studied him for a moment, that felt longer than it was. "Good morning, Officer Collins." She glanced at the orderly line, the relaxed room, the overcoat man standing where everyone else stood. "Busy morning." "Yes, ma'am." "Any problems?" Brad considered the question. "A few opportunities," he said. For the first time, Naomi smiled fully enough for those nearby to notice. It changed her whole face and startled half the lobby more than authority ever had. She placed a small envelope on the desk. "Your review." Brad opened it after she moved toward the elevators. "Public contact duty restored. Community relations commendation pending. Supervisor recommendation eligible in 6 months." He read the lines twice, then looked up. Naomi had stopped at the elevator doors. She turned back just once. "Officer Collins." "Yes, ma'am." "A title can open doors," she said. "Character decides what happens after they open." Then the elevator carried her upward. Henderson glanced sideways at him. "Do not get dramatic on me," she said. Brad laughed quietly and slipped the letter into his pocket. The next visitor stepped forward, nervous, searching for identification in too many pockets. Brad smiled and pointed to the tray. "Take your time," he said. "You are all right." And for the first time in a long while, the words were true for more than one person. He once wore authority like armor. Now he understood something stronger. Real power does not need to belittle anyone to be seen.